We are live here with SCI TV. I'm Joshua Gordon, the founder of the Sports Conflict Institute. My co-host today is Ken Pendleton. Ken, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Josh.
And our guest is Woody Wommack. Welcome.
Hey, thanks, Josh. Thanks for having me on.
So, Woody, you're with Rivals.com. You cover recruiting in football, and that's really our focus today is NCAA football. But we're hoping you can give a little background as to how you ended up in this great role, which I know many of my students in my teaching side of things would love to be in your role. But how did you get there, and tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I didn't take the typical role. A lot of people kind of work their way up through the business. We see guys, start out at the team site level or maybe even as an intern and kind of work their way up. I actually have a journalism background. I started, I went to journalism school at the University of Central Florida. And that was my plan to become a journalist full time, and I did that. I worked at a couple of different newspapers, and I played football in high school like most people, and then I just sort of was more interested in education than trying to chase the dream. And it turned out that I was working in the newspaper industry. I was developing relationships with a lot of people, especially down in Florida. A lot of top-notch recruits seemed to like me quite a bit, and we found ourselves hitting it off, and that led to me kind of breaking information and being a source on the recruiting front despite not really being in the industry. So that kind of caught the eye of some people and sort of put me on the radar of the talent evaluators at Rivals, and that's when they decided to give me a look and give me a shot. And it took me a while to ease into it. I mean, the world of recruiting is a lot different than the world of journalism, and I have to do a lot more studying on the football side because, I didn't play professional football. I didn't play college football. So that part was tough, but I'm an information man always, and that's kind of been the best part of my job, building relationships and getting to know a lot of these people, early on in their careers.
Great. And coming from the University of Central Florida program, I have to imagine that you are exposed to some of the things we deal with coming from Richard Lapchick being on campus as well. And so really our program focuses a lot on where challenges happen for people off the field. And one of my first questions for you would be, when you're talking about recruiting, how much of those off-field intangibles come into play beyond the physical attributes and the things that you see on the field?
Well, yeah, it's tough because we don't, we think we know the guys and we have a lot of information. We spend a lot of time with them, but you don't really know what they're getting into, and you have to kind of weigh that. Fans get on us a lot too, especially when we learn about a recruit who might be struggling in the classroom, or we know from their coach that they're struggling with discipline, or maybe they don't love the game as much, and we have to weigh how much we factor that in. It's kind of a case-by-case basis. I mean, we try not to consider it too much when it comes, because we don't know everything about everyone. On the football field, we can compare apples to apples because we've seen them all so many times at so many different occasions. So it definitely factors in a little bit, but it's kind of a slippery slope because of what we don't know, and that's one of the variables that leads to five-star recruits maybe not panning out, or two-star guys that are more hungry ending up making us look bad by becoming stars in college and the NFL.
Yeah, the very idea of what's happened in the last 10 years, it's always been this way, and especially in the South, where high school football recruiting is essentially the biggest thing that occurs between football seasons. It's it just generates an astonishing amount of publicity. But what's happened in the last 10 years, where there's just so much scrutiny and players are signing earlier, how do you feel about that? The fact that essentially you're scrutinizing a 16-year-old, right? And really, that person likes the publicity, but do you feel it's actually good for them to be front and center to the extent they are? That every aspect, every time they tweet something, it goes out on 24/7 or Rivals or ESPN or what have you?
Well, I think it's tough. Especially some of these kids, they have unstable home lives. They're not, they don't have structure in their lives, and it's tough for us to be, essentially making them superstars. Some of these guys are, nationally known names by the time they're junior in high school. If you look back and remember what we were like at that time, who knows how? I definitely don't know how I would have handled it. But unfortunately, it's part of the game. People want to know, and these players are excellent. They do. The best ones, they sort of become like pro athletes. They're used to dealing with the media. They get used to the attention, and they mature faster. I think social media has definitely added a whole different aspect to it because of, like you said, if the player is fighting with his girlfriend and he tweets something maybe meant to be directed at her, fans take it as maybe he's tweeting about my school or my coach or something like that, and it's off and running. So I think that part, to be a kid and to really have that kind of scrutiny is tough, and it does make me uncomfortable, especially we're being asked to rank guys younger and younger. I mean, one of the companies recently came out with a 2017 rankings. That's, those are guys who have not played one down of their sophomore year. I mean, how do you think when a guy's 15, how do you project how he's going to be when he's, 21, 22? That's difficult.
Right, and I mean, it was unheard of even 10 years ago for a person who was a junior to commit to a major program. And now, if I were to look at the list for schools, schools like Florida State, they have a substantial list of juniors who have already committed, and Coach Fisher actively courts them. Do you think that's and I'm not trying to single him out at all, because I just think he's probably a little ahead of the curve, in his recruiting classes seem to speak to his good judgment. But do you think that that this is actually healthy for the sport and for the kids?
I don't think it is. I'd like to see some sort of rule to where there was some sort of limit on that, especially with the commitments and stuff. And I think we could see it change, with the new power that the Big Five conferences have. If they want to make a change, if they're uncomfortable with it, they can. It's just a matter of, it's kind of like college basketball. We've seen it happened earlier there, where prospects are getting identified earlier and earlier, given offers earlier and earlier, and then you see them commit, decommit, then they get established as being drama queens or attention whores or something like that, when really you're 14, 15, 16, you're going to change your mind about where you want to go to college. I mean, I enrolled in 3 different colleges myself during my time, so it's difficult, and I'd like to see it slow down a little bit. The coaches say they want that too, but they're the ones offering the scholarships. I mean, there's a prospect from the Jacksonville area in Florida. He's going into the 9th grade, and he has probably 10 or 15 scholarship offers from major Division I programs: Florida State, Clemson, Georgia. And if he was ready to commit, I think they would say, yes, you can identify yourself as a commit, and they're sort of protected by the fact that they don't have to talk about it. The coaches don't have to face the media and say, hey, why are you encouraging this? Because they say, oh, it's against the rules for me to talk about recruits, and so they're kind of left to not really have that responsibility that we have to come and talk about it.
Hey, you mentioned the changes coming from the Big Five, and we're in pretty interesting times right now in college football and really uncharted territory. Can you give us some insight from your perspective of things that you think might be coming at us, especially on the recruiting side of things, with your sense of where change might be coming?
Well, I think the divide's only going to get bigger between those Big Five and the other schools. I mean, I think you're going to see them set up a situation where they're able to give players that stipend. I mean, I know it's going back and forth right now on the number, and the judge was kind of vague in that recent Ed O'Bannon decision that came down on the $5,000 cap. So that's still in flux. I think that's going to take a while to work out. But you're going to see a school like Alabama or Florida State schools that's getting that big-time TV money and has more money to spend. They're going to start distributing that to the players. Hopefully, it's even across the board within the Big Five. So Iowa State's not getting punished because they don't bring in as much revenue as Virginia Tech or another school like that. But I'd like to see that, but I think that's going to be the first change. So if a student really wants to stay at a school like UCF, where I went to school, but he's a 4-star committed, he can go to even a lower school and make more money because they're willing to pay or they're able to pay. I think that's going to really widen that gap, and I think that's the first big change we're going to see.
It's hard not to see this just ratcheting up the pressure, and I always think of the Urban Meyer story when he left Florida, that the moment of when you realize you had a problem is when you're texting recruits at the Christmas Mass. And we, on one level, you blame. We were talking. You were getting at this before, that we have a tendency to say, well, the coaches are perpetuating this, but of course, the problem is there's a competitive advantage if you're going to get a student's good graces or an athlete's good graces by texting him at Christmas Mass. Well, that's hard not to do, And so I'm wondering if you were czar and they appointed you head of the NCAA and you're in charge of recruiting rules, what would you do? Name 3 things you would do that are different than right now, if any.
Well, I'd sort of impose that dead period both ways. Like you said, urban, that's a dead period where they're not supposed to be allowed to talk to recruits, but if a recruit contacts them, they're allowed to talk to them. The recruits need to be, enforced in that dead period too, and say, hey, the coaches are on vacation. No one can have communication. You can't respond. You can't call the coach, and that's how it's going to be. I mean, I'd like to see that because, believe me, I'm texting recruits on Christmas Day too. Unfortunately, when they want to commit or they're making their decision. I mean, I really laid down the law this year on the 4th of July. I had a couple prospects tell me they were going to commit on the 4th of July, and I said, well, have fun. You're not going to hear from me. I'm not going to report on the 4th of July. I need to take a day off. I mean, that would be my first rule. I'd like that dead period to go both ways with the players and coaches, and then I'd like to see that early signing period that we've talked about so much. I mean, if a player's going to commit so early, let him get locked in so the drama is taken out of it during his senior season on the field. I mean, if they want to take him, it makes it easier on everyone to not have to think about it. So those 2 things are 2 big ones that I'd like to see really right away, and I'm not sure what the holdup is, honestly.
And we'd love to hear some stories from you to the extent that you can share about some of the really challenging things you've seen happening in the land of recruiting. And certainly you're in the trenches a lot more than any of us are, and you get to see the good and the bad, and we'd love to hear some of those stories to the extent that you could share them.
Well, one of the things we talked about, social media, and the coaches, they use it to their advantage. I mean, they're out there, they're talking to kids, they're tweeting with kids, but what they don't realize is the kids talk to each other. So you may be targeting, I heard a story recently of one of the top schools in the country targeting 2 big-time offensive linemen. They bring one kid in, they're from different states, they're not interacting with each other on as far as the coaches are concerned. They bring the first guy in, they say, hey, you're number 1 on our board, you're the top guy at this position, this other guy's number 2, we want you, this is how bad we want you, this is proof. Then, a week later, the second kid came in, and they had flipped the names on the board and said, you're number 1, and the previous guy that was there, he's number 2. We want you much more than we want him. Well, then after the visit, the 2 players talked to each other and realized that they were told the same story. So now that school's not only not getting one of them, both of them know that they're lying, and they're both not considering that school anymore. So, I mean, you have you have the players talking to each other more than ever. These guys are friends. Players from California talk to players in Florida, and they all know what lies are being told. So, it's really difficult there for the coaches to be dishonest or maybe, tell white lies like they used to in the past.
Right. It does occur to me that one of the things that's been good about what's happened in the last 10 years is that players are far more educated about who the existing players are on a team, who's already been recruited, and about the kind of and about what a team's recruiting priorities are, like the example you just had illustrated. And so I'm not trying to harp on Florida State, but they signed 3 quarterbacks now in their incoming class, and just from the outside, I found myself saying that seems really odd in this day and age that you would have 3 4-star quarterbacks committing to the same school, and presumably all well informed, about what's going on. None of them seem to express any public misgivings, but it seems to happen rare and rare. Whereas when I first started watching all this 25, 30 years ago, it would be common because there was almost no way a kid who was a tight end prospect from Michigan would have any idea that the University of Florida was signing a tight end prospect from Florida as well, right? And so, is that your experience? Do you find that the kids are just way more versed in who the competition is and what the team's needs are?
Yeah, it's a totally different ballgame. I mean, the kid would have had to get a newspaper or some recruiting guide from, how they don't know any of that stuff, or they didn't know. Now you actually see, I saw a quarterback actually in this year's class who didn't want to go to a school because there was no depth at the position. His parents wanted him to redshirt for a year and sort of grow and develop. And this school is saying, hey, look, you're going to be the number 2 right away. We're going to be counting on you to be ready to play. And the prospect's dad didn't think he was going to be ready. So he actually picked another school because they felt like they were going to get pressured in and get thrown into a situation where they weren't going to be able to succeed. So that information, I mean, is at an all-time high. parents are more involved, coaches are more involved, you know, shady uncles or whoever are more involved. They all know the depth chart. They all know the coaches, and they know all the assistant coaches. They know the grad assistants. I mean, it's really crazy the level of communication that everyone has with one another.
Well, let's talk about the shady uncles. You know, we always hear stories, and you may be in a perspective to have some idea. How many shady practices are there, without naming names or schools? How prevalent is it, especially in the South?
Well, it's definitely prevalent. I think you have some people who get a bad rap, though, that don't do it. It sort of goes the other way. We've seen some nonprofit organizations where you have people who are actually helping get the kids on campus to take the visits for the benefit of the kids. They're not being paid by the coaches. It may be a former athlete from that area giving money back to a foundation and helping actually get those kids exposed, helping them get to campuses what they couldn't normally afford. I mean, say you're a kid from Memphis, your parents don't have a car, and then Ohio State says, hey, if you come to our camp and do well, we're going to offer you a scholarship. Well, and maybe an NFL player from Memphis has an organization set up there where they're training players for free, and they are giving them rides to these schools. I mean, it's a fine line, but then there's the other ones who I ran into one the other night on a sideline at a football game, and he said, my kid plays for this school. And I said, oh, your son? And he said, oh, no, one of the kids that I work with. And I said, oh, you're a trainer? Or he said, no, I'm more of a mentor type. And I was like, what does that mean? I mean, I was there with a quarterback coach, actually, who does private lessons in the Atlanta area, and we were both sort of confused as to what this guy does, but it's clear that he delivers players to certain programs with the expectation of he's going to receive money, or he's brokering a deal maybe for that player and their family.
And what are some of the best ways that parents and family can get educated on how to navigate what can be a pretty complex process for their sons to go through?
Well, there's a lot of information online. I mean, the key is to make sure that you read it. I mean, it's a Google search away. A lot of parents have some blogs out there, parents who have been through it. It's tough because you're talking about non-committable offers. A school like Alabama offers 200, 250 kids. They're not going to accept every commitment from those ones, and we see it every year where parents, or more importantly, the players, don't realize they try to commit to a school and they're told that they can't. And it's just it's a fine line. So if I'm a parent, I talk to the coach. I mean, if a coach is calling your son, get him on the phone and ask the questions. I mean, that's the thing, is you have easy access. You need to talk to the high school coach as well and say, what are you hearing? What's going on? I mean, the important part is parents can be involved. It's tough because we see some parents who get a little too much involved, like they're almost sort of stage mom types who are kind of reliving things through their highly touted recruit offspring. But talk to coaches. I mean, head coaches will call your son or hit them up on Twitter, and you say, I want to speak to you. I mean, if you're Butch Jones or Derek Mason and it's a 5-star recruit, you want to talk to the parent because you want to develop that relationship. So, parents have to realize that once they get into that recruiting relationship, they don't need to be in awe of these guys. These are coaches, and they're more importantly, they're people who are willing to give you answers and help educate you.
Have coaches declined in influence because of all the summer camps and stuff that go on now in the intermediaries, or do you feel like they're just as influential as they were when you started doing this?
Well, it's different than back in the day where Bobby Bowden would swoop in January and be the closer and, lock guys up, because now assistant coaches are so involved in building that relationship through a long period of time. But they still have, when Jimbo Fisher rides in on his golf cart at that summer camp and he offers to have somebody come and talk to him, I mean, the players are still in awe. I mean, Nick Saban has a thing where he invites a player into his office when he tells them that they're offered, or he calls them personally and tells them they have an offer. So they still use it to their advantage. They're still doing that to where, they're the big deal. It's almost like talking to the big boss, but the guys on the ground are those assistant coaches, those grad assistants, those people in the recruiting office. They're the ones out there beating the streets for months, and the head coach may be the one that comes in and seals the deal.
Yeah, it's interesting because you have so many coaching transitions going on now. where you have a whole staff transformed, and all of a sudden the big thing I read right away is, well, this is going to really affect recruiting in South Florida because no one they're bringing in has those roots, or all of a sudden they're recruiting kids from the Midwest because this assistant coach came from Minnesota, or what have you. This 15 years ago, the stability among elite staffs especially was so high, and now it seems to be so much more fluid than it used to be. What I was really going to ask though is, are the high school coaches declining in influence over the kid compared to what they used to have?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, 100%. I mean, because they're not involved. I mean, every high school usually has one person who is designated to handle recruiting, because the head coach, especially in the South, is under a lot of pressure to deliver a winning program. I mean, some of these coaches down here make a lot of money. There's a lot of pressure from the community, and it's almost like a mini college environment when you're talking about big time football in the South. So an assistant coach may be the one taking them on visits, maybe the one taking them out in the summer, and then they're training with people in the off season. They're working out of school, and then they're training with a group of elite prospects, usually in that city that they're from. I mean, cities like Nashville have huge groups where all the top players train together. Atlanta, there's 3 or 4 different groups where guys are all training together, and especially the same goes for Miami and Orlando and all the other big time areas. So high school coaches, they're important early, especially to help get the kids' attention, and then if they have the kids' ear, they're important, but it's not like it used to be where Jimbo would come in, or Bobby Bowden would come in and say, hey, who do I need to look at? Those days are kind of definitely declining, especially later on in guys' careers.
So Ken and I often talk about agents and what their role should be in a perfect world, and I'd love to get your insight as to, should agents have a seat at the table in this whole process in a perfect world, or would they only complicate things?
I don't know. It's tough. I mean, if you took some of the best ones maybe and said, hey, how can we deal with this so you're not trying to poach our guys early? Can we interview while guys are still in college? Or, I mean, maybe they could have a role, especially with college players like, highly touted guys like Jameis Winston, Marcus Mariota, who are definitely going to be top 5 draft picks. I mean, assuming, unless there's a catastrophic injury, those guys need to have a way to educate themselves about the process going into the next level. I don't want to see agents get involved with recruits or anything like that, but I think if the Big Five's doing this and they want to do it the right way and they're kind of taking a lot of the power away from the NCAA, bringing in a couple agents to consult, wouldn't be the worst idea, because they have a different perspective to bring.
Yeah, I've always thought that the coaches sort of make a big mistake because they run off the agent, and I'm like, you're more likely to have an intelligent conversation. For example, let's say you have a kid who really does need another year of school. By the fact that everything occurs under the table, if the agent's paying the kid money under the table, he has a big incentive to have him come out early, because he wants to get him signed, but knowing he has absolutely no way of tying him to whatever informal understanding they have. Whereas if they were actually able to commit to an agent, he could the coach could talk to him and says, look, if you wait this year, he'll go up this much in the draft. And I actually think, given if we take Josh Luke seriously, given the prevalence of agents interacting with college kids, it probably would actually we'd have more transparency in the process, and that might actually be better.
Yeah, I mean, the agents are around from what I'm told. I mean, like you said, we've read stories about how much they're giving players money and whatnot. I mean, it may be a situation where, Jameis Winston or Mariota, the agent has a deal signed with Nike already going into his junior or senior year, and that's on the books, and he says, I want to stay and develop another year, and he has that guaranteed money. Or maybe the agent can help them, research the insurance policies that we're seeing become a bigger deal now. I think that wouldn't hurt at all.
So how much pressure do you ever face in terms of your analysis and people trying to influence your thoughts and recommendations? What types of things have you had to push people aside for?
Well, if any parents with their children, they get defensive, especially about the rankings. We see them, view their children as the best, and we try to do the best we can. And so, you have to explain that to them. We see high school coaches. Some high school coaches, if you move all their players down the rankings, he will tell you you're not welcome there at their school, or the same with players. If you if you drop a player in the rankings, he's probably not going to pick up the phone when you're trying to reach him. I mean, that's just how it is. But you know, I'm sort of a prickly character when I'm out and about in terms of, you know, I get a little bit defensive. I say, you know, we're trying to do the best we can, and I think a lot of people know that. There's a select few that think that you know, I always, of course, all the fan bases always accuse us of liking their rival more than them. I mean, the rankings just came out today for the new top 100, and I have, you know, Auburn fans telling me how much I love Alabama, and I have Tennessee fans telling me how much I love Vanderbilt, and vice versa. So usually, if everyone is telling you that you love their rival more than them, that means you're doing it right. So that's the kind of approach that we take.
Do we have any evidence that the rankings have gotten more accurate over the years with all this information? I mean, like, is the percentage of players who are 5 stars who actually have NFL careers increased from a decade and a half ago?
Yeah, I think it's, every year the story comes out. I mean, we see if several media outlets send us information and ask us for archival information. We haven't done our own, but I think I saw some statistics last year that said, you know, the probability of being a first-round pick and being a 5-star is, you know, obviously much greater than that of lower-ranked players. And there's always going to be some anomalies. The 2-star guys that, you know, like Lane Johnson, who was a quarterback in high school, who went to junior college and then walked on to Oklahoma and developed that offensive lineman. I mean, we can't foresee that stuff, but, you know, if you're a 5-star recruit, I mean, there's only 30 or so of them every year, and those are the guys with the best chance to develop and blossom at the next level.
So what are some of the assessment tools you wish you had at your disposal that you don't, especially from our perspective, things that deal with some of the neck-up competencies, things that aren't just physical in nature? What else would you want to know about some of these recruits?
Well, I mean, that stuff would be very helpful to know, you know, to know about how much they know about the game and how much, you know, they can learn going forward. A lot of schools will keep us out of their camps because they don't want to see us evaluate things. So we'd like to see what the coaches are doing, which prospects they're looking at, what they're putting them through, which guys they pull aside. And a lot of schools let us in. You know, some schools like Alabama, Clemson doesn't let us in, I don't believe. And that sort of gets frustrating because they think somehow we're interfering with the camp when really we just want to watch. I mean, we just want to be like normal media at a normal practice. But some coaches are very particular about that. You know, another thing, like you mentioned, I sort of wish there was a high school Wonderlic. I mean, you know, we know that test comes under scrutiny, but if it's being used to evaluate guys going into the NFL, I don't see why it wouldn't be accurate, you know, for guys going into college. So it's tough because you're dealing with teenagers, but that stuff would be helpful. You know, as much time as we can see them. I mean, we like to see film. A lot of coaches are getting creative with the way they cut up the film, though, now, where you can take any player and take 6 or 7 plays and make him look like he's all world. Well, the rest of it is sort of hidden. So the more video we have is also great, and that keeps getting better every year.
You mentioned that Alabama and Clemson is examples of schools that are relatively closed in their access. Which schools are the most open of the major schools?
Auburn, I'd probably say, is the one that comes to mind as being the most open. You know, in terms of letting people there for the camps and sort of you know, being relatively accommodating to the media. I was recently at South Carolina. It went pretty well there. You know, Florida is okay. They sort of, the thing that's frustrating about a lot of the schools is they hide behind rules that don't exist. So they'll say, you know, hey, you can't be in here. It's NCAA rule. And you're like, well, last week I was, you know, in the locker room at another school, and I know that the compliance person was in there. So, and we talk to the NCAA too. That's the thing, is we have NCAA reps at our events to make sure that we're compliant. I mean, you know, we have some big events where we're bringing in big time talent and giving them free stuff, and we want to make sure we're operating within the rules too. So that's the thing, is if a school wants to enforce the rules, that's fine, but I hate when they try to make it seem like it's not in their hands. It's the NCAA, when really it's them that decide.
And as we bring our conversation to a close, any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience or the world at large on recruiting or anything around college football in general?
Well, I know you guys got a smart crowd here, so I probably don't have to tell them, just remember these guys are kids. I mean, we see them getting attacked on Twitter and social media when they may decommit from a school, or, I mean, they're just trying to make a decision. Like I said, they're going to change their mind. It's going to happen. Hopefully they do it the best way possible. But, I love college football. I'm glad we're getting some changes. I hope the players can really get that true cost of attendance going. I know I have friends who played major college football who are paying student loans, and they were on scholarship, but they couldn't work. So, I'd like to see that happen. I'd like to see players, get a chunk back of that likeness that's being used, those jerseys that are being sold. And I think things are actually moving in a positive direction. I mean, now that that decision's been made and we're seeing it happening, I like the way things are going. I don't want to see the little guys get left behind either, but I think finding a way to get the players some money all across the board too, getting that cost of attendance taken care of, I think that's the biggest thing.
Great. Well, thank you so much today for being on the show. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the insights, and we'll continue to follow you with interest.
All righty. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.